Good morning, Wham! All right, Wham, what's up? We're doing chapter 12, the Union Generals. We're going to learn, it's good to learn about the Union Generals. The Southern Army, maybe at first was a better army, but not at that. The Union actually became very good too. But the South had better generals, especially at first. They had better leadership. The Union went through some relatively poor generalship at first, especially with McClellan here. And but then they got Grant, and then things got better. Grant was a really good leader, a good military general. But I really wanted to read this chapter because it discusses the Anaconda Plan, which is what really kind of won the war, I think. The way they were able to blockade the Confederates. All right, so why don't we read that, Connor? Say hi, Connor.
Hi. Wait, wasn't Ulysses S. Grant the 18th president or 17th?
Yes. He is the 18th president. He becomes a president because he was such a good general.
Yes.
All right.
So.
And the Union is, of course, the North. General Winfield Scott was in charge of the Union Army. He was an old man in terrible physical shape. He even had to be helped onto his horse. There was nothing wrong with his mind. It was sharp as ever. General Scott looked at the situation when the war began and figured out it would take at least 2 or 3 years to win a war against the South. He came up with a plan. To begin, he thought the North should blockade southern ports. That means northern ships would patrol the southern coast and keep ships from entering or leaving. That wouldn't be easy, and a few ships would probably slip through the blockade. But if the South could be kept from trading with Europe, it would be in trouble. The Confederacy was an agricultural nation. It didn't manufacture much of anything. If the South was to fight a war, it would need cash to buy goods, especially weapons. To get cash, it needed to sell its cotton in Europe. A blockade that closed southern ports would really hurt the Confederacy. General Scott also thought the North had to control the Mississippi River. That would cut off Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas from the rest of the Confederacy. It would close more ports and keep that cotton from being exported. As to the actual fighting, the Union could send armies from the east and armies from the west to squeeze the Confederacy. And that is pretty much what happened during the Civil War. But it didn't take 2 or 3 years. It took 4 years, from April of 1861 to April of 1865. Guess what happened when people heard of Winfield Scott's plan? They laughed. The war lasting 2 or 3 years? Why? That was the nonsense of an old man. This was a war that would be over in a few months. Everybody knew that. A plan to squeeze the enemy? That was just plain silly. They called Winfield's plan the Anaconda Plan, because an anaconda is a snake that squeezes its prey. And it caused so much dismay that President Lincoln was forced to look for a new general. He found a new man who was handsome and intelligent and popular with his troops. He was a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and a former railroad superintendent. His name was George Britton McClellan. McClellan, who was 35, was a small, dapper man with a strong body, thick dark hair, and a bushy mustache. He rode a black horse named Dan Webster. His admirers called him the young Napoleon. He liked the comparison with the great French general and often posed like Napoleon with one hand in his vest. McClellan was an excellent organizer. That's an important ability when you are in charge of large numbers of people. A general has to feed, house, and equip his armies. He has to be able to move them long distances. He has to inspire them. He has to train them. McClellan was good at all those things. Absolutely he was. There was just one problem. It was a big problem for a general. he didn't like to fight. He kept hesitating and making excuses and pulling back. That's true. He was a great general in the sense he helped start the army, make good troops, but he couldn't lead them in the field.
That's the whole point of a general.
True, but there are some generals who just get the armies ready. That's what he should have done. Trained them. Poor Abraham Lincoln. It was hard enough being president, but being president during a war is really difficult. Especially when you can't find a good general. Lincoln tried generals: McClellan, Fremont, Burnside, Halleck, Hooker, Pope, Meade, and some others. None of them fought the way Lincoln thought they should. Every time the North lost a battle, and it lost quite a few, Lincoln got blamed, even though the generals weren't doing what the president was asking. There just didn't seem to be a leader he could trust. Then he looked out west and found a general who was winning battles. A general who trapped the whole Confederate army and took all the soldiers prisoners of war. That general, who was good at fighting, was named Ulysses S. Grant. He even had initials to match his country. Lincoln called him the quietest little fellow you ever saw. Grant had been to West Point, where he was nicknamed Uncle Sam because of those initials. Actually, his army friends called him Sam Grant. They just called him Sam. At West Point, Sam Grant was a fair student. He graduated in the middle of his class, but too small to excel at any sport but riding. He was a very good rider. He fought in the Mexican War and then left the army. It wasn't much of a success in civilian life. He was poor, really poor. When he inherited a slave, he could have sold the slave for $1,000, but he didn't do it. He gave the man his freedom. Yeah, that's really important. Grant inherited a slave, and he kept the slave for a year and worked with him and treated him like a human. And then, even though Grant was poor and really needed the money, he freed him. He said, "No, I promise you I'd free you when we work together, you're free." So that's important about Grant. He hated slavery. It didn't look as if Grant would amount to anything until the Civil War came along, and it made him famous. Famous enough to one day be president, as Connor said.
Yeah.
He was the kind of general who didn't worry much about military theories. He just outkilled or outlasted his enemy. General Grant and his friend, red-bearded General William Tecumseh Sherman, whom we'll get to later, were just the kind of generals Lincoln had been looking for. Yeah, so those were the two good generals of the North. But I wanted you to see that Anaconda plan. All right. Bye. Say goodnight, Connor.
Good night, Connor. Or good day, whatever.
Yeah, it's true. It's day
like,
for them.
Well, different classes, so it could be.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So.
All right.
Good.
Afternoon.
Good. Good whole day.
All right.
Good whole day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.